Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is January 12th, 2025. We are just under 2 weeks into the year, I guess. And remember last week when we did the show and we were like, hey, it's been nice this last week. We're only doing I think it was like a 57-minute show this week because it was such a light week. We were so thrilled with that, and then this week happened.
My friends, as you all know, I'm a fighter. Every bone in my body has always told me to fight because I care deeply about Canadians. I care deeply about this country, and I will always be motivated by what is in the best interest of Canadians. And the fact is, despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. That's why this morning I advised the Governor-General that we need a new session of Parliament. She has granted this request, and the House will now be prorogued until March 24th. Over the holidays, I've also had a chance to reflect and have had long talks with my family about our future. Throughout the course of my career, any success I have personally achieved has been because of their support and with their encouragement. So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the
January 6th, 2025. January 6th. Damn you, January 6th. It's getting to the point where like all politicians should just like stay in bed, I think, on January 6th, because not a great day in the land of history, let's go with. But yeah, that was less than a week ago. When you think about everything that's happened since then, that was less than a week ago. That was a Monday, January 6th. And normally when a higher profile politician, certainly a higher powered politician, announces their intention to resign, there is a moment of decorum that has historically happened, especially in Canadian politics. We've had that history of kind of going, well, you know what? Not a big fan, but you did the public service thing for a bunch of years, and that's not something to be discounted, unless, of course, you're the leader of another political party, in which case it's very clear. Yes, that's immediately to be discounted. Jagmeet Singh came in swinging. Justin Trudeau's Liberals let down Canadians. They let you down on home prices. They let you down on healthcare, which is, again, provincial jurisdiction. They let you down by allowing corporate greed to run wild, even with the country facing another serious blow to Canadian jobs at a cost of our living, this time from Donald Trump. They're still focused only on themselves and their political fate. The problem is not Justin Trudeau. It's every minister that's been calling the shots. It's every Liberal MP that ever looked down their nose at Canadians who are worried about high costs or crumbling healthcare. Rena. It goes on. But it's wild. Very, very clearly, the political messaging was, hey, we have to very quickly move. We've been criticizing Justin Trudeau for quite some time, so we have to move the political football. We have to get it off of Justin Trudeau and paint everybody who's ever been involved with the Liberal Party in any way, which is fascinating. Pierre Poilievre responded not once but twice. His first response was he sat in front of a library. There were pictures. He had a tie. It was decorum-y. Nothing has changed. Every Liberal MP and leadership contender supported everything Trudeau did for 9 years, and now they want to trick voters by swapping in another Liberal face to keep ripping off Canadians for another 4 years, just like Justin. The only way to fix what Liberals broke is a carbon tax election to elect common sense Conservatives who will bring home Canada's province. Hyperlink called for an election. Now, that is just dishonest. It's unfortunately just dishonest because there has been no shortage of news going on for the last couple of years about Liberal MPs and ministers who have said, oh, I don't like how things are going. I don't think this is the right way we should be doing things. I don't agree with this decision. There's been no shortage of that. So again, we've Justin Trudeau's political corpse isn't even cold yet, and we're already trying to make sure that nobody's looking at the corpse anymore. Let's look at all of those living things that we have to run against in an upcoming election. But it didn't take very long for Pierre Poilievre to really sort of leave behind the little whispers of decorum that may or may not have been in that original announcement, because just a few hours later, he tweeted out, Justin Trudeau claims he is a fighter, air quotes. So why not exercise his legal right to call an election now and face me? Because he is too weak and afraid. So the country now spirals out of control with a weak lame duck PM while Liberals fight each other for power. Cowardly chaos. Sign here to call an election now. So it is wild to me. And again, I'm not a Justin Trudeau stan, as the kids say. That's not what I'm going after here at all. But it is wild to me that all of the people who have been saying for weeks and weeks and months, Justin Trudeau, he's got to resign. He does. We don't want Justin Trudeau being the prime minister anymore. He's got to resign. It's the only responsible thing to do. And then he resigns, and they're like, oh no, that was not cool. You should have faced me in an election on my terms, the way that I wanted. It's just laughable. But there were other political leaders who responded. Danielle Smith, of course, responded with diplomacy. You'll see why that gets to be funny later. At this critical time, Canadians need and deserve a prime minister and federal government with a clear mandate, one from Canadian people to negotiate with the incoming U.S. president and his administration on one of the most important international negotiations we've ever faced as a country. The Liberal Party has no such mandate from Canadians, and they are putting their selfish political interests ahead of the Canadian people by paralyzing Parliament and suspending democracy for months. Well, it's like 2.5 months, while they fight a divisive internal leadership contest, like the UCP did a year out from an election. It is one of the most irresponsible and selfish acts of a government in Canadian history. We call on all federal parties and MPs to force an election at the first available opportunity and give Canadians the opportunity to pick a party and leader to represent their interests at this critical time for our nation. It's very important to realize that elected officials should only be operating within the mandate that they ran on, says Danielle Smith of the Alberta Pension Plan and the provincial police force and the anti-trans policies and the we'll get to some more of the those as we work our way through the show. But there was some surprising little moments of, okay, good. There's still some Canadiano left in politics. From the Green Party, Elizabeth May showed a little bit of class. This morning, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau finally admitted the inescapable conclusion that he had to step aside to make room for new leadership. The fact that this announcement could surprise no one is to admit the obvious. Over the last year, but particularly over the last few weeks since December 16th, the decline in support has been painful to watch, like a slow motion train wreck. But the partisan and political moment should not distract from the basic human things that should be said. Justin Trudeau was never groomed to fill his father's shoes. As a young man, he did not seek out a future in politics. He decided to be a teacher. As the Liberal Party was knocked so far back following the 2011 election, the MP for Papineau was assigned the far rear corner of the chamber of the Centre Bloc, sitting with me, the first Green MP, and the then small remnants of the Bloc. With 4 MPs, I know how he struggled with the decision of whether to run for Liberal leader, weighing how much it might impact his personal life. He was being recruited as someone who could rescue the Liberals. A majority win was not a likelihood. If anyone knew what it would mean for his children if he were to become PM, as a child of the PM, Justin Trudeau knew. I have observed for many years how he's consistently prioritized his family, times, and his children. To say public service is a sacrifice is to state the obvious. For that, and especially at a time when basic civility has eroded to where he could be attacked verbally and rudely in front of his youngest at a Christmas holiday, underscores how hard that public service has become. See, that's how you do it. She opened with, is anyone really surprised? The boat's been taking on water for quite some time. Can't be shocked, but let's not be horrible about it. Let's acknowledge the history and the personal cost that has existed. Whether or not you want to agree with all of his policies, Lord knows I certainly don't. He had a very difficult period of things that he had to govern through. And I feel like it's safe to say that Justin Trudeau has always, for the most part, conducted himself since becoming prime minister, before you get all up in the ats, since becoming prime minister, he's conducted himself with a fairly high level of decorum and civility, which is important. The head Nenshi leader of the Alberta NDP diverted significantly from the federal NDP and said, on a day when everyone is all about politics and positioning themselves for what happens next, it's easy to forget that it's also about human beings. Public service can be hard, and I'm grateful for all to make the choice to serve regardless of the political stripe. Thank you to the Prime Minister for his years of service. Alberta needs to work with whatever and whoever comes next to reduce the cost of living, to create and sustain great jobs, and to preserve and build great healthcare and education. So, I mean, the last two, they found ways to work in. They're like, hey, this is what we would do. But they didn't punch down on the guy who's already out the door. And it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, just a little bit, that Pierre Poilievre would get so upset about the fact that that Justin Trudeau would not be the candidate he was running against, because the implication is Poilievre was 100% confident that he could win against Trudeau. A fairly fair bet, but that confidence seems to be a little bit of dissipated, maybe a little bit, at the prospect of he might have to face somebody who isn't wearing Justin Trudeau's legacy and history in the same way that Justin Trudeau would. But that was just Monday. Then we got a couple of days. Well, the very next day, there was this.
If we were to work under the assumption that you're serious about making Canada 51st state of the United States, the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada said, under no circumstance will it ever be the 51st state.
Maybe he won't win, but maybe he will. I don't care.
You had suggested.
Listen, I don't care what he says.
But Sir Lopez, you said you were considering military force to acquire Panama and Greenland. Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force, because Canada and the United States.
Now, this should, and it has in some ways marked a bit of a turning point in the conversation around the politics that we're facing between Alberta and the rest of the country, and Canada and the United States, and the United States and the rest of the world. Because a lot of people are starting to clue into the fact that when President-elect Trump has been making his comments about the Panama Canal, about Greenland, about Canada, he's not actually all that joking. It isn't a troll, and it's not that. And there's a bunch of different arguments. Many people have pointed to shipping routes and said, well, if he controls these shipping routes, then he controls most of the trade routes by sea to and from China and Russia in no small way. So that's not nothing. There is as strategic if you want to be that kind of world dominating force. There are strategic arguments to be made for it, but we need to recognize that we're kind of past the point of that's just Donald being Donald. He's telegraphing some things, and he's not messing around. The fact that that reporter there asked, "Hey, so the current conservative leader, who many people expect to be the new next prime minister of Canada, he's saying that never going to happen." Donald Trump's response was, "Maybe he'll win, maybe he won't. I don't care." That speaks to the high regard with which Donald Trump not just holds Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, but also the rest of Canada and Canadian leadership. He doesn't care. And that's a really important thing to be aware of. The other piece that's really, really important to be aware of is, while he has threatened to use military force to take, it's all so surreal to say this stuff out loud, Panama, and to take Greenland, he's very clear. No, I won't use military force for Canada. I will just economically crush them, which is, again, a problem, because it is in line with some of the things that he has said. And political leaders across Canada did not waste a whole lot of time in responding. Justin Trudeau responded, "There isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada would become part of the United States. Workers and communities in both our countries benefit from being each other's biggest trading and security partner." Pierre Poilievre also responded, "Canada will never be the 51st state, period. We are a great and independent country." And then he eventually pivots to all of the wonderful things that Conservatives will do in the next election. Danielle Smith responded as well. And this one is particularly interesting. And it's interesting for two reasons. The first reason is Danielle Smith, since day one of her leadership bid, when she decided that she was going to come out of the podcasting realm, and she was going to pursue the leadership of the UCP. Ever since she made that announcement, she has been all about sovereignty. The Free Alberta strategy was all about, hey, Alberta is basically like, we're kind of our own country. Like, we're technically not, but we're kind of our own country. And anybody who says different, we're going to get all Sovereignty Act on them. We're not going to mess around. We are sovereign, so very sovereign. That's her word, is sovereignty. The sovereign, all of the things. And yet, when she responded, that word was surprisingly absent. Danielle Smith's response was Canada is a strong, independent nation with the ninth largest economy in the world, and our southern neighbors benefit from this economic strength. We are the United States' best customer. We buy more products and services from the U.S. than any other single nation, and more than Germany, UK, France, Italy, and Vietnam combined. Now, I gotta wonder about those choices, because let's go through the list of countries that the United States have fought wars with. I'm pretty sure France is the only one of those five. Open to correction. I'm pretty sure France is the only one of those five that the United States hasn't gone to war with. We can strengthen our partnership even further in the coming years by securing our shared border and fighting unfair Chinese trade practices that harm workers in both of our countries. I will continue to share with Americans the economic story Alberta has to tell, and that's why I'll be in Washington during the inauguration. It's interesting that she threw in the inauguration piece, because there were many people who were saying, whoa. If Donald Trump is like, he's starting to sound really serious about this whole taking over Canada thing. If he's really serious about this whole taking over Canada thing, then maybe you should not go to the inauguration. Maybe trying to appease the guy who is saying that he doesn't care whether or not Pierre Poilievre becomes the next prime minister of Canada. He's going to take Canada and make it the 51st state by economic force. We literally played the clip. If that's where we are, maybe going to his party isn't the best of choices. Perhaps that does not send the strong, "Oh no, we're quite sovereign, thank you very much," message. So it's interesting that she included that. No, I'm absolutely going to the inauguration. I've already bought the shoes. But of particular note, that was not the first comment that emanated from the Premier's office. The first comment that we saw that has since been deleted that emanated from the Premier's office came from her Deputy Chief of Staff, who retweeted Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, who just finished saying there's a snowball's chance in hell that Canada would become part of the United States. Patrick Malkin, one of Smith's right-hand people, said outgoing political leaders, much like expired milk, shouldn't make decisions. Their time's up, their ideas are sour, and nobody wants the aftertaste of last term's policies. So he's criticizing the policy position of Justin Trudeau that Canada will never become the 51st state. Now, the expired milk reference probably came fairly natural to Mr. Malkin. And the reason for that is when you go through his CV, the things that made him qualified to be the Deputy Chief of Staff to Danielle Smith, one of the resume items that you can't help but not overlook, is his restaurant, the Granary. Oh, he ran a restaurant. That's where the expired milk bit comes from. Very clever. And in the restaurant, it got a little bit of attention back in 2022. The reason why was because back when Albertans were emerging from the pandemic, Patrick Malkin's restaurant was given the opportunity to reopen and use vaccine passports. That was a Jason Kenney move. We could reopen all the restaurants as long as the people there had the vaccinations, then they were good. And the Granary decided rather than have people show the vaccine passports, they would just accept pictures of people's dogs. Now, I'm as big of a fan as a good doggo picture as anyone. To be clear, I love my cute dog pictures. I think dogs are delightful. I'm not a cat person. But to subvert public health measures that are being brought in so that your business can still survive by having dog photos, well, that's Mr. Malkin's, part of Mr. Malkin's CV. Very, very serious people who are running the province. And calling out the Prime Minister for saying that we'll never be a part of the United States, particularly so when Danielle Smith, she hasn't been around, it turns out. She's been on a little bit of a break. Working break, though, it seems perhaps. There was a press release that came out on Friday. Premier Danielle Smith is traveling out of the country on vacation with her family beginning January 7th. Now, again, I think it's worth highlighting for just a quick sec that this press release came out on January 10th. So a full 3 days after the Premier left the province, out of the country, on vacation, they released a press release saying, oh yeah, she's going to be out of the country. Beginning January 7th, returning January 17th. During this time, Premier Smith will be continuing business. So everybody assumed, well, everybody knows Danielle Smith's favorite vacation spot is ironically enough, Panama. So a lot of people were like, oh, she must be going to Panama for 10 days. That'll be nice for her. I hope she has fun. Which is probably why it came as a big surprise when on Sunday morning, Danielle Smith threw out this tweet where she posted about spending 24 hours at Mar-a-Lago meeting with Trump, and the Premier's office released a statement on it. So it wasn't just the social media post that had the words. They also had pictures. And the government actually said all of the same things that's in Danielle Smith's little post. Over the last 24 hours, I had the opportunity to meet President. And then she tagged him. Oh, you love it being tagged. He does. At Mar-a-Lago last night at his golf club this morning. We had a friendly and constructive conversation during which I emphasized the mutual importance of U.S.-Canadian energy relationship and specifically how hundreds of thousands of American jobs are supported by energy exports from Alberta. I was also able to have similar discussions with several key allies of the incoming administration and was encouraged to hear their support for strong energy and security relationship with Canada. She went on to say some other things on behalf of all Albertans. Now, Danielle Smith, whose mandate is to be clear, the Premier of Alberta, appears to have gone down to the United States, to Mar-a-Lago, to hang out with Donald Trump and some other folks. Don't worry, we're going to get to that in a sec. In order to talk to Donald Trump about the importance of Alberta's oil and gas, not Alberta's beef, not any of Alberta's other industries, but she doesn't have any standing on the international front to be making deals with Trump for Canada. That's not part of her mandate. So it's a little interesting that the whole mandate thing just gets to be used when convenient, as opposed to when actually appropriate and when it may actually have some force. But the event appeared to be a who's who of, you've got to be kidding me. Smith appeared in photos with Jordan Peterson, because of course, at least Jordan Peterson's down in the States now. So Donald Trump and Kevin O'Leary, known for many things. Kevin O'Leary, known for not being able to remember if his wife drank before she killed some folks with a boat. So that's Kevin O'Leary, also from the Dragon's Den and bombastic pronunciations on the internet and Fox News. Both Smith and O'Leary wore a lovely white. There's Kevin in his white suit with the white pants, Danielle Smith with the white dress, and you're not supposed to wear. Kevin should know this, being the wonderful man that he is. He should know you're not supposed to wear white pants after Labor Day until Memorial Day. Of course, you're also not supposed to let your wife drive a boat and kill two people with a breathalyzer issuing an alert range on a test after the crash, where you testify that you might have drank, but you can't remember. But just for the record, when we say you're not supposed to wear white pants between Labor Day and Memorial Day, we're spelling labor with a U. But it didn't take long with all of that before Danielle Smith's proxies, the ones that got left behind, started to tweet out some things of their own, because Danielle Smith, rightfully so, got quite a bit of criticism for for taking this trip, and it surprised everybody. Jagmeet Singh said, "Nothing to see here, Canada, just Canadian conservatives celebrating with Donald Trump and billionaires days after they threatened to annex Canada, and just days before they launch a full-scale assault on the Canadian economy, jobs, and your family," referring to the 25% tariffs. Rob Anderson, the author of the Free Alberta Strategy, the craftsman of the, what's it called again? Yes, the Sovereignty Act, said, "What a feckless moron. What's your plan, Jagmeet? Abandon diplomacy altogether and arm your Maserati to defend our borders from the full-scale assault? Get a bloody grip already." Now, I mean, I just finished dunking to some degree on Jagmeet Singh for his not great statement when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that he was resigning. But let's talk about Rob's. We're going to get to Bruce. Don't worry. Oh, we're so going to get to Bruce. But let's talk about Rob's statement for just the quickest of secs here, because I think it is really quite important. I mean, diplomacy, and that's why I will call you a moron. Abandon diplomacy or arm your Maserati. Now, that's a reference, for anybody who's unfamiliar, to a photo that was taken of Jagmeet Singh walking down the street and standing beside a Maserati. That picture made the rounds on the internet. Jagmeet Singh issued several statements saying, "That's not my car. Like, sorry, I was walking down the street. There's a Maserati there, but it's not my car." And it should be alarming to some that we have two options at this particular juncture. Either Rob Anderson is so unaware about national politics that he did not know that Jagmeet Singh had said, no, that's not my car, or he's willfully choosing to try to perpetuate a lie to politicize things because diplomacy. That's also the guy who's theoretically, in many ways, minding the house while Danielle Smith is out of town. But let's take a look at the executive director for the Premier's office. This is Mr. Bruce McAllister. I see the left losing their minds over, and he tagged her, so she knew he was defending him at AB Danielle Smith meeting with, and then he tagged at real Donald Trump. Oh, I just want that retweet so bad. Please, Donald, please. Seriously, what part of diplomacy don't they like? Imagine if Nenshi or sellout Singh were in charge. Thankfully, they're not and never will be. This is what real leaders do. Now, here's the thing with that. If we are to say that real leaders behave with diplomacy and dignity, I can't help but wonder how they'd feel about their little minions with the name calling and the bad attempts at alliteration running their mouths while the leaders are out doing diplomacy. But if diplomacy is how you get things done, then one need only look at the rhetoric that Danielle Smith has levied towards the federal government, particularly Justin Trudeau, over the last, since she became premier, and go, wait, why is it that Danielle Smith felt comfortable doing the name calling, felt comfortable literally drafting legislation, which on its first version was criticized as being profoundly unconstitutional, profoundly illegal, and profoundly un-Canadian. She's literally made laws to try to pick fights with Justin Trudeau. The things that she said about Justin Trudeau and his counterparts at the federal level have not been in the same tone as how she's choosing to try to, some might say, appease Donald Trump. So you have to wonder, what's the difference? What's the difference between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump? What does Danielle Smith know about the difference between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump? And the inescapable answer gets to be Danielle Smith was never afraid of Justin Trudeau because, as I said earlier, disagree with as many of his policies as you like, Justin Trudeau, for the most part, while Prime Minister, conducted himself with dignity and with decorum. Now, sometimes his attempts at decorum came off as campy, no question about that, but he was not somebody who would pop off and make sudden decrees about, I'm going to take away the province's right to be provinces. I'm going to disregard international and national law in order to get the things that I want just because I'm prime minister and I said so. It's fairly clear Donald Trump will do all of those things. So the difference, they don't engage with kindness or diplomacy with the people that they respect or the people that they know are going to conduct themselves with diplomacy and respect. They do it with people that they're afraid of. And that's the thing. When we get to the UCP government and the people that Danielle Smith has chosen to surround herself with, they are very, very quick to put on the clothing of, oh, but diplomacy, we must be diplomatic because we have these things. And the reality is they're only doing that because they're afraid. And the trick, the thing that they should be, the question that they should be asking themselves, above all else, is if a hack podcast host is able to figure out the reason why Danielle Smith and the UCP were so happy charging at the federal government for years and years and years, the defining characteristic is they're afraid of Trump. If a hack podcast host and a bunch of other commentators have been able to figure that out, you'd better believe the Donald has too. But one of the other questions that has to be asked when it comes to the mandate piece is how many other premiers are going to go down to Mar-a-Lago and have golf breakfast with Mr. Trump? How many of them are going to have even the opportunity to do that? Because if Danielle Smith is so committed to her language of mandates, for her to go down there, unless we see the Council of Federation come forward and say, hey, you know what? As all of the first ministers, the premiers of all of the provinces, we agreed. Danielle Smith, best and brightest, we sent her down there to go represent all of us. If that statement doesn't get made, then Danielle Smith is off playing cowboy on her own. And when we take a look at some of the other deals that Danielle Smith has either attempted to negotiate or has tried to negotiate or has negotiated, that should get everybody some significant cause for concern. But one of the other things that should maybe give Danielle Smith and the rest of the UCP cause for concern is if Pierre Poilievre, the soon-to-be prime minister, who on the hierarchy of the things ranks significantly higher than Danielle Smith, if Donald Trump doesn't care what Pierre Poilievre says, if there's nothing that Pierre Poilievre can say that is going to change Donald Trump's mind, he's already made his mind up about oil and gas.
And it means that a use.
Mr. President, if we were to work under the assumption that you're serious about making Canada 51st state of the United States, the leader of the Conservative Party.
That was the wrong clip. I'm going to see if we can find that clip, and then we'll come back to that, because Donald Trump actually did come out and say, I don't care about Canada's oil and gas. We don't need Canada's oil and gas. We don't need Canada's anything. We're fine on our own. So if Donald Trump is willing to say, I don't need Canada's oil and gas, then it should be pretty clear breakfast and a 10-minute sit down is not going to change his mind just because he sat down with Danielle Smith. But if we're talking about entitlements, there's this fascinating thing that's going on in the province of Alberta right now, where there's all these contracts that are being negotiated, and the government has stepped forward with nurses, with all kinds of people, and has said, "Oh, times are tough. Times are tough. They're so tough. The times. I don't know about the raises because the times, they're so tough." Unless, of course, you're an MLA, in which case the UCP just voted to give themselves raises. And it's not just they're giving themselves raises. The raises would begin in April. They're going to be retroactive too to the start of the year, which is reasonable after having a few years of frozen pay. Fascinating argument to make. I wonder if they will apply that to all of the teachers and healthcare workers and everybody else who hasn't gotten any significant raises in a while. Shane Getson said that would account for approximately a 2.2% increase. The UCP Majority Committee also. So again, it's a little important to note that this is a committee decision that was made by a committee that is not we're going to do 50% UCP, 50% NDP, and then we'll get like Tom to come in and be the breaking vote if we need one. This is a UCP Majority Committee. They also voted for their caucus to get at least an extra $1 million from taxpayers for items like research support and public communications. And this is where the argument gets to be a little bullshitty, because Getson says the NDP gets $4.9 million for in-member services, while the UCP MLAs outside of cabinet, they only get $3 million. So Getson said the bump to the UCP caucus budget is about leveling the playing field with the opposition NDP, which has 37 members to the UCP's 24 backbenchers. But the only reason that the UCP has 24 backbenchers is because they have one of the biggest cabinets in Alberta's history as a province. It would be very, very easy to go like, hey, all of those extra resources that cabinet ministers get, all the extra pay that cabinet ministers get, all of the extras that all of the cabinet ministers get, maybe we don't need this many cabinet ministers. Maybe we can just, let's go down to 20, and then we'll have roughly, or we could go down to 15. And then they would have the same amount of backbenchers as the NDP. They get the same amount of funding. But rather than spare down the cabinet, take a little bit of fat off the cabinet side, they're saying, well, we'd like to have instead of taking the fat off the cabinet side, we'd just like to add more fat, please. That's what we're going to do. And because they have a majority committee, they're able to do that. But it doesn't stop there, because that same committee voted to create a transition allowance for MLAs when they leave office. So if you lose an election, you're still going to get paid. You're still going to be able to get taxpayers' money. Members who were elected in 2019 and 2023 will be eligible and will receive 1 month of pay after leaving office for every year they served in the legislature, up to a maximum of 6 months. So if you were elected in 2019 and you serve 6 years to 2025, and you don't get reelected, you'll still get paid your MLA monies, salary, for 6 months after you're out of the legislature. You're not doing any work for Albertans or anything like that. You're just getting paid because, which is wild. For a government that is telling so many people who are dealing with so many different bargaining positions right now to say, hey, yeah, we can't give you, like, can you imagine if it was a union contract with, I don't know, respiratory therapists, where if a respiratory therapist got fired from their job, which, to be clear, is what happens when you lose an election. That's the electorate firing you. If you can imagine, if it was written into a union contract, if you get fired from your job, we'll give you 6 months of pay anyways. As long as you've worked for at least 6 years, we'll give you 6 months of pay. I can't even. When you think about the changes to the conflict of interest, to the gifts that the UCP MLAs can accept, it's just another layer of grift. I'm not sure what to call it. Moving on from there and transitioning a little bit to healthcare. It's a mixed bag here, because we got two homeless stories that we need to talk about. One of them is horrifying, quite frankly, and it has to do with the number of amputations that have been going on in the province of Alberta over the last year because of frostbite. So we're talking about homeless and houseless individuals who have gotten frostbite, and they have to have the things amputated. And Edmonton's not doing super great. The number of amputations due to frostbite in Edmonton reached 110 last year, the highest level in more than a decade. This is according to a CBC News story. Calgary, though, marked its second consecutive winter of declining frostbite amputations, counting roughly 1/3. So let's say 30-ish of the amputations that Edmonton saw. Now, nobody can go, oh, here's why. There's a lot of speculation. Doctors and homeless advocates are pointing to two key differences between the two cities that may have played a role. Edmonton's aggressive encampment eviction policy and the use of a more assertive frostbite treatment protocol in Calgary's emergency departments. But there's also another little piece that might be relevant to the whole conversation. Calgary tends to have more warm days too. We've been seeing more and more Chinooks. We've been seeing more and more milder winters for the most part. So it's not inconceivable that could also play a pretty big factor in why we're seeing these run down. But it's also really important to highlight that the encampments piece is a big part of the conversation. The reality, as we've talked about on the show before, is that the number of homeless and houseless people in Edmonton has gone up by no small amount. And the response to that has been, well, we're just going to, when they gather too much or when they dare to set up a tent, we're just going to tear that down and we're going to give them the choice to either move on. Now that we've destroyed their tent, confiscated their belongings, they can move on, or they can go to one of the homeless processing facilities. When you take away the things that people have to protect themselves from the elements, it shouldn't be a huge surprise. Now, I want to be very, very clear. I'm not in any way advocating, what we need is more encampments. No, what we need is more housing. We need more housing with less judgment. And part of the reason that we need less judgment is because we need to remember that these homeless and houseless Albertans are still Albertans. And as we saw in Red Deer this week, a lot of them are heroes. There was an explosion in Red Deer on Thursday. There were 5 workers inside of that bus depot who were injured. And the first people that ran to go and get them out of the fire, to get them out of the flames, to rescue them, 8 men and women who rely on the Safe Harbor Society services and the emergency shelter rushed in to help within seconds of the blast. The executive director of the Safe Harbor Society said his clients and staffs were instrumental in rescuing the workers who were caught in the explosion and the fire that followed. It's ludicrous, the demonization that the homeless and the houseless have to face. Because all too often, there's stories like this where it's the homeless and the houseless who are the first ones to try to render assistance to people who need it. Moving on from there, we got to talk about... let's go back down memory lane for a sec. Compliments of one of my favorite social media accounts, Disordered YYC.
And it means that a UCP government under my leadership will not delist any medical services or prescriptions now covered by Alberta.
No exceptions. It's a public health guarantee, said Danielle Smith right before they made cuts to public health things. Effective February 1st, Alberta's UCP government will be decreasing payments and delisting some services for children and seniors. Oh, look, it's the most vulnerable we're going after again. Partial eye exams for children and seniors will no longer be covered by the province. The news broke when 2 memos that had to do with this new policy direction that's in direct contradiction from what Danielle Smith promised everybody in the run-up to the election, detail the cuts that are going to be happening for people who rely on public health insurance. So, Danielle Smith, we're not going to remove anything until, of course, we actually remove the things. It tracks. But that's not the only major healthcare news that we saw this week. There's big changes to Alberta Health Services. On Wednesday, Adriana LaGrange announced that acute care, which includes hospitals, emergency services, and surgery care, is getting a new boss. The way that the government said is, as progress is made to establish acute care Alberta's government is appointing Dr. Chris Eagle, who was formerly, he's a bigwig, as interim president and CEO. This appointment will take effect February 1st to coincide with the establishment of Acute Care Alberta as a legal entity. Andre Tremblay, Deputy Minister of Alberta Health, has been appointed interim president and CEO of Alberta Health Services. This means that Athana Metsopoulos is out as CEO of AHS. It's about roughly 3 years before her contract was supposed to end. This means operating under some assumptions. So the reasons for the separation of the government and Athana have been not provided in any way whatsoever. So we don't know whether or not this was Athana saying, enough's enough. I'm out. We don't know whether or not this was Danielle Smith saying she's not listening. She's not doing the things that I want her to do fast enough. So I'm getting rid of her. We don't know whether Athana was caught using the photocopier without permission. We don't know any of these things. So the next piece is a big if. But if it was the province that made the decision to cut ties with Athana, then what that means is she's getting quite the severance pay, because her contract was for 4 years, and the termination of the contract means that she's supposed to get severance pay equal to 1 month base annual salary for each completed month of service, payable by way of monthly installments in arrears of accordance, or after completion of 1 year of service, which is where we would be, assuming that the dates all line up. 12 months annual base salary payable by way of monthly installments in arrears, as long as she doesn't make any other big money in other places. So she's going to be getting, if she wasn't fired with cause, it seems to suggest she's going to be getting almost $500,000 in severance. And this is all, of course, coming on the taxpayer's dime. And for additional context, that is almost twice the amount that it would have taken to get orthopedic surgeries back up and running to full capacity in Edmonton. Because if you remember, and yeah, we keep talking about this because it's a big deal, there was a group of physicians that put forward a proposal that for $240,000 a year, they would be able to resolve the orthopedic surgery disruption. And the government said, no, we're not going to do that. But we will potentially pay $500,000 in severance. Moving on from there. And we're kind of teeing things up a little bit, because we do have some plans to get into the conversation around Grassy Mountain in a much bigger way, the coal mining in a much bigger way than we already have. But in order to make some sense of what we're going to talk about, we've got a clip that we have to play you first.
This does not apply to open pit mining when it comes to Grassy Mountain. So it's disingenuous for you to say there will not be open pit mining when in fact there could well be, given what happens with Grassy Mountain. But on the royalty part of this, you talked about a substantial increase. Are we talking there about what Albertans might get from oil and gas, for example, or how high are you kind of picturing that might go?
Well, first of all, Emma, I said no new open pit mines. So I'm not disingenuous. There's certain contractual relationships we have to continue to honor, but we're going to honor those at the same time, make sure we keep.
Now that clip, that comment from Brian Jean there, we've got certain contractual obligations that we have to meet. That got a lot of people's attention because the Grassy Mountain project was rejected on the government's website. It was listed as canceled. So you have to wonder what kind of contracts has, since that project was declared dead, what are the contractual obligations that Brian Jean is talking about there? And fortunately, this guy, I got to say, Brent McKay, has been crushing it. This guy's doing such a good job of the practice of journalism. He has brought so many big stories to the forefront. So huge props to Brett, because dang, he's just doing such a good job of the things. So he dug into what are these contractual obligations from his story. It's about 2 or 3 different things, none of which is sort of a formal contract. That is a spokesperson for Energy and Minerals. One of them is that Northback is a freehold owner of mineral lands. There's a contractual obligation between the government and them on the fact that they have the rights to the freehold that they own. The second part of the obligation comes from a legal concept called promissory estoppel, which means that when somebody with authority makes you a promise, you're allowed to rely on it. And if they break the promise, you're allowed to get compensation. Now, his promise, according to the ministry, was made in a ministerial order issued in 2022, which paused coal mining and exploration in the eastern slopes of the Rockies, but exempts projects with active approval status or advanced projects, defined as coal projects where applicants have submitted a project summary to the Alberta Energy Regulator to determine whether an environmental impact assessment is required. Now, lots of legal scholars have weighed in and said that because the Northback Benga Australian billionaire lady proposal had been shut down, the project had been, the federal government and the provincial government both said, yeah, no, this ain't going to work. We're done. That it shouldn't count as an advanced project. But then Brian Jean decided to go and write himself a letter. We've talked about this many times before. Mr. Jean wrote a letter to the president and CEO of the Alberta Energy Regulator, where he said, the purpose of this letter is to provide my interpretation, bearing in mind that the AAR is supposed to be arm's length. The purpose of this letter is to provide my interpretation regarding appropriate application of the definition of advanced coal project under the order. It is my understanding that 4 projects met and meet the definition of advanced coal project under clauses 3 and 6 of the ministerial order 002-2022, mine 14, Vista Coal Mine, Phase 2, Grassy Mountain, and Tent Mountain. Each of these 4 projects has submitted a project summary to the AAR for the purposes of determining whether an environmental impact assessment is required at the time the ministerial order was signed. He goes on, it is my expectation that the AAR will review any applications related to the advanced coal projects following all applicable legislation and AAR regulatory processes. He also went on the record publicly at both press conferences and releasing statements to, among others, City TV, where he said, oh no, Grassy Mountain, totally an advanced project. Yeah, no, it totally is. I'm just, because I said so, it's an advanced project. So the government has in effect made a promise that they relied on for their applications. And if we were to cancel it, we would owe them pretty significant compensation, the ministry said. But there's some debate as to that. And a story from the Tyee actually may have shed a little bit of light as to what the real motivations for this were. Because in talking about the very, very rich lady, Gina Reinhardt, she's the owner, when you get high up of the food chain, of the Benga / Northback / we're going to rip up Grassy Mountain mining proposal. In the last 3 years, she has repeatedly sued the Alberta and federal governments and challenged regulatory processes. And even though 3 separate courts have found her arguments baseless and without merit, she continues to sue. 2 outstanding lawsuits, for example, contend the Alberta government owes her billions because her mining plans were stymied. Overwhelming public opposition to coal mining forced the government to impose a coal moratorium in the Rockies to protect critical watersheds. So it's almost as if unprecedented. Sometimes people file massive, massive lawsuits that are unfounded to try to get what they want, even though it's not based on anything that has any sort of merit before the courts. They're just trying to intimidate people. And with all of that in mind, it's important to highlight that some of the hearings going on for this proposal are actually happening literally this week. They're literally happening this week in Calgary. And we wanted to just take a quick second to highlight some of that. So the hearings are going on in Calgary at the Alberta Energy Regulator. The address is 250 5th Street Southwest in Calgary. It all starts on January 14th, 15th, and 16th. And at 11:30, there's going to be people there. They've issued an invitation. And look, here's this invitation on our screen here. Gather on the front steps with signs and noisemakers and all of that kind of good stuff. And you should definitely do that. Because the reality is, when we're talking about the Grassy Mine, we're talking about a project that the federal and provincial governments have already said in their assessments that were actually arm's length assessments. Brian Jean didn't get to influence these ones. That it represents a significant risk to the water quality for pretty much all of southern Alberta. And that's not something that anybody should be willing to back down from. But again, as we saw with Danielle Smith and the UCP folks doing their very, very best to appease the Donald, there are people for whom they will bend over backwards to appease, to try to make happy. One of the ways to get them to do that appears to be the president-elect of the United States and make giant threats. The other one appears to be by making baseless lawsuits that continually get slapped down. But sticking with the legal stuffs, we got to talk about a couple other things real quick, because there were some legal events that happened. One of them happens to do with the publisher of the Western Standard, Derek Fildebrandt. He got himself into trouble coming up to a year ago because there were some kids on his damn lawn, and he believed that they had knocked over his "Don't let dogs poop on my lawn" sign, and he didn't like that. Now, this part I can all say because it's stuff that even Derek agreed to in court records. He was very angry. And so he chased them to try to teach them a lesson of some kind. And that's where the two stories start to differ. Because according to Derek, he was just shaking his cane like Grandpa Simpson. I believe that's actually pretty much a verbatim quote. And then chased them down with his big truck to the point where bystanders had to intervene. But the kids said that he threatened them. He threatened to shoot them. And that changes the legal jeopardy of things a little bit. He was found not guilty. But there's some folks that disagree with that. One of them is the Crown. Crown has filed a notice of appeal asking for a Court of King's Bench justice to overturn the acquittals and substitute convictions, or alternatively, order a new trial. And this is where I'm going to read directly from the story here, because I don't want to get myself into trouble. Justice Alan Fradsham found that Fildebrandt did tell the kids, "I protect my property and belongings with a gun." However, the judge ruled the comment wasn't intended to intimidate. I guess he was just sharing information, and thus acquitted the accused on all 4 charges in November. Fildebrandt was the MLA for Strathmore Brooks from 2015 to 2019, originally representing the Wild Rose, then the United Conservative Party, and then finally serving as an independent because of other legal problems. The Crown has said that it's an unreasonable verdict, and it's a note of appeal. The Crown indicated a plan to argue that Fradham's verdict was unreasonable and that he erred in law when finding Fildebrandt not guilty. And I'm not making this up. When asked for comment by CBC, when CBC reached out to Mr. Fildebrandt and was like, "Hey, what do you think, Big D?" he responded by calling the Crown prosecutors losers. But that's not the only legal story that we saw this week. Just got to wet my whistle for the next part, because y'all know what's coming next. Clearing the pipes to make sure I'm good to go. Marco Van Hogenbos received his sentencing this week. Marco, who has been a prominent figure in Alberta politics since the Coots blockade, because he was found guilty of being one of the organizers of the Coots blockade, was sentenced to 120 days in jail. He was found guilty a couple of months ago, but it was the sentencing that just happened. And he was immediately marched off to jail. This happened on January 10th, so literally just 2 days ago. He was sentenced to 120 days in jail. His co-conspirator, George Jansen, received a 3-month sentence, which is to be served in the community. He's also ordered to complete 100 hours of community service by the end of his sentence. Now, all of this being said, there has been no word on whether or not the UCP will remove or if he's resigned. There's been no public statements made in regards to Marco's current status on the UCP board that he was serving on, at least up until just a couple of months ago, well after the conviction. There's no word if the UCP will be removing the convicted criminal serving time from the Constituency Association boards. But given the recent fangirling by the Premier of Alberta over a convicted criminal who has a documented history of fraud, sexual assault, insurrection, undermining democracy, and actively trying to take over her own country by brute economic force in order to make Canada the 51st state, the odds of Marco getting kicked off the board, they're probably up for some debate. Moving on from there. One of the stories that we talked about last week had to do with a story that we were anticipating from an outlet called Livewire, and a journalist who goes by the pen handle of Aaron Toombs. And this is actually a really interesting insight into why things go badly when people who don't know how to do the things try to do the things. In an email entitled Green Line Update by Deputy Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors, Bryce Stewart, writing to Minister Dreeshen on July 23rd, there was an indication there was an option being sought by the Premier, Danielle Smith. We're following up on getting information for the underground station at City Hall that was pre-built as per the Premier's request. I understand it was initially developed with the intent of providing additional future capacity for the Red Line. So, back in July, Danielle Smith was already looking at ways to try to mess with the lineup of the Green Line. In another email sent on the same day by the Director of Operations, Executive Operations for the Transportation Ministry, Tegan Lawton, to the Executive Director of the Technical Branch of the Transportation Ministry, Rob Lawson, quoted Premier Smith. PO has asked, Premier's office has asked, can you check out the underground stations that have been pre-built at City Hall? There may be the right terminal point and interface within the existing LRT. Can we get more information on Calgary City Hall LRT location? I'd like whatever information, bullets, maps, the rail team can pull. This was on, again, July 23rd. It was only on August 1st, 7 days later, that Dreeshen promised that the funds for the Green Line were secure. A month later, Dreeshen pulled those funds. So Danielle Smith had been toying with some ideas. She maybe heard some rumors about these maps, this underground City Hall station. Boy, that sounds like fun. Maybe there's some way that we could reallocate that. Maybe there's some way that we could readjust that. Man, I don't know. I'm just a premier. I'm not a designer of railroads. But the last part that I said should have really come first, because the Premier's office has no business trying to interfere in the design of a project that had already been designed. But nonetheless, that's exactly what Danielle Smith was doing a month and a week, really, before the funds were pulled. And this is one of the big problems with the UCP government. They are the kings and queens of unintended consequences. And this is where I'm gonna things maybe get a little bit personal. Because there's been some changes that were quietly slipped through that have had some pretty significant effects. And for reasons of circumstance, they've affected the community that I live in. For anybody who's been following the breakdown for any length of time, you might remember the very, 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 very first shows that we did were shot in an empty field. This was literally almost 6 years ago now. A couple of months away from being 6 years ago. And the reason why we shot those episodes in that empty field is because we were trying to bring some attention to the fact that the north central area of Calgary had not to that point in time had the high school that it was supposed to have for a very, 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 very long time. It just simply hadn't happened. Kept being reprioritized. And because of that, kids were having to bus insane distances, which was not only impacting their social lives, it was impacting how early they had to get up to go to school, how much time was spent in transit. There were some kids who were spending an hour and a half to get to school and then an hour and a half to get back home from school. And that was on the good days when it wasn't super busy. So by way of background, the high school in North Central has been something that's been on the Breakdown's radar since literally the word go. Well, and this is where we get to the land of unintended consequences. This map was released just this week. Now, bear with me, because I know some of you are listening to this and watching this right now and going, North Central, I don't live there. How could it possibly affect me? And you're not wrong to think that, except you're wrong. And I'm going to walk you through why and how. This map that's on the screen right now is a map of the redrawn boundaries that exist for a couple of different things. Now, because the high school in North Central wasn't built in a timely fashion, it was literally over capacity when it opened. And because it's been over capacity for the 2 years now that it's been open, they've had to put caps on how many kids can go to that school. Now, how do you manage a cap? There's a couple of different ways. One of them is to say you have to live within this big area in order to be able to go to this school, period. The other is to say, if you live within this big area, we're going to have a lottery in order to decide who gets to go to this school and who gets punted to the next nearest school. And we'll get to that in just a sec. There will be, however, priority for people who can walk. If you're within walking distance of the school, then we're going to give you priority in that lottery. Now, this is where it gets kind of bonkers, because prior to 2023, all school boards, except for the Calgary Board of Education, used either driving distance from home to school or as the crow flies to calculate transportation distances as to whether or not the student got transportation paid for. So if you lived outside of a certain distance, then you would get a free bus pass or a discounted bus pass, or you'd get to ride on a bus. The CBE, up until 2023, used walking distances that included engineered pathways rather than driving distances. Because in most new communities, it's not the chock-a-block city blocks. There are a lot of different pathways that are built in to make it easier for people to walk around and get around the community. In March of 2023, the UCP changed the rules for eligibility for transportation. So under the old rules, students had to live at least 2.4 kilometers from their designated school to access busing or to get a bus pass. The UCP changed the distance they lowered it to 1 kilometer for students in grade 1 to 6 and 2 kilometers for grades 7 to 12, beginning in September of 2024. They also mandated that the distances for those measurements had to be measured by roadways, not pathways, because not all areas, particularly older ones, have designated pathways. So from the start, it almost sounds like the UCP was trying to do maybe a good thing. They were trying to give more kids access to being able to get bus passes, to have the transit. But as always, there's also an and. So there are rumors that the UCP believed that the CBE was using the pathway calculation so that they could generate a $7 million surplus for general transportation in order to cover a $7 million deficit in specialized transportation. Specialized transportation is for kids who are navigating disabilities. According to those same rules, LaGrange changed the rules to prevent the CBE from overcharging general busing students for the benefit of specialized busing students. So there's some questions that need to be asked in regards to motive. Now, even if you did believe that the CBE was moving money away or moving money around to get more funding for disabled students to have access to transportation, they were moving funding around to get disabled students access to transportation, which isn't a bad thing. Let's be clear about that. Even if that rumor is true, It's still not a bad thing, because making sure that disabled kids have access to transportation so they can get to school, that's actually a good thing. And if they had to do some accounting chicanery in order to make that happen, I personally can live with that. But all of that aside, for reasons that appear to defy reasoning, the CBE has decided to use the same criteria for roadways and ignore all pathways and giant open school fields when calculating who can walk to their school. So, by way of example, here's a picture of the high school. Now, a couple of things that are important to keep in mind. The big roads that you see on your left there, those are the biggest main drags that come in and out of this section of north central Calgary. There are only 2 lanes. So clogging up those arteries with a boatload of cars is probably not the best strategy. Directly behind the school on the right side of the screen, you can see 2 fields. One of them is a field that's for the high school. The other one is a field that's for the junior high school that's directly beside it. Now, let me show you how dumb this whole situation is. Because if you're a kid who lives on this street right here, this is where you live, on this street, you can see all of those houses back out onto the high school. So it's not unreasonable to suggest that for a kid who lives on that street where all of the houses back out onto the high school, their walk to school might be like 50 meters, if that, because again, they're right there. There's the houses, there's the school, it's all right there. But if we use the criteria that the UCP have mandated and that the CBE is using to measure who gets to be within the walking distance map for this school, that student isn't allowed to walk through their backyard to get right to school. They have to walk 1.6 kilometers, crossing 5 different roadways in order to enter the school. Now, what I love about this map so much is that the front door is actually on the other side of the school. So they've made the distance a little bit farther than it has to be, but it also underscores the point that the kid could just walk through their backyard to the school. So this isn't just the North Central High School. This is for all of the schools in Calgary. So Calgary, can we meet me over here in camera 1? I'm already at camera 1. There's a lot to unpack here, but it's not just North Central. This is the entirety of Calgary that's going to be affected by these policy changes. And in case you thought it couldn't possibly get dumber, wait, it does. Because if we go to another map, and again, if we're looking here, we've got this kid. Let's say this kid lives on this street that's just on the other side of that other junior high school. For them to walk across the 2 fields to get to the high school is 400 meters. How dumb is this? Let's go to a different map. Let's go to the actual map. Again, this is the actual map. There's an arrow that shows the distance between if a kid lives on that street and a kid lives and he's walking to the school, the 400 meters. Now that kid falls outside of the walking distance map. The walking distance is the darker color one. That kid falls outside of that distance. Which kid doesn't? That one. Only by nature of the fact that the kid who's coming from the very, very bottom doesn't have access to any pathways and is just going to be going straight up the main drag there. And the kid who does have access to the pathways, that is only 400 meters, not even pathways, just big fields that are not going to be developed because they're sports fields for the schools, has to go 400 meters. That kid is considered to be farther away than the kid at the bottom of the map. And where does it get really, really nuts? Well, in order to get a sense of where the next school is, we have to zoom way out. Because if you're a kid who doesn't win the literal lottery and get to go to that school that is already over capacity, you're literally going halfway across the city to the next high school. If you squint at this map and maybe like lean really, really close to your screen, we did leave the little arrow in there. It's just, unbelievably hard to see, because that's how far kids are going to have to go if they don't win the lottery in order to go to these schools. Now, again, this is another example of unintended consequences. And this is another example where we're going to talk about the fact that there are elections coming up. There are school board trustee elections coming up very, very soon across the province. And there are people who are running for positions who are looking to be the very bestest of poodles for the UCP. They're the kind of people who will look at this kind of thing and go, it's fine. Nothing to worry about. That'll build character. There are Take Back Alberta candidates who are going to be running for school boards. David Parker's made it very, very clear on more than one occasion. And it's easy to write him off as irrelevant, but he's not. The movement that he built, based on fear, based on lies, based on things that aren't even happening in schools, is still very much alive. And so the question that people should be asking themselves as we're heading into the next set of elections is, what kind of candidate do you want to represent you and your communities? Because if you've got a candidate who's just going to do whatever the UCP says and doesn't highlight how these unintended consequences are going to have catastrophic effects for kids who could very, very easily walk through their backyard to get to school. If you don't have elected officials that are willing to say, hey, I think we maybe overlooked some things here, I think maybe we should talk about them, things are not going to get any better. And we have a government that has demonstrated that they will lean into unintended consequences. They will make mistakes because they haven't looked at the full breadth and depth of what it is that they're messing with. Now, we're very, very fortunate in North Central that there's a school board trustee who has already publicly said that she's going to work very, very hard to address that. She's up for re-election. I don't have a problem saying that she's got my vote if she decides to run again, because she's exactly the kind of person who's able to have a conversation with the powers that be without being bad at it, because she cares about the kids in the communities that she's trying to serve. And people who are running for school board trustee who are just doing so because they're looking at catapulting themselves to some sort of political opportunity are not the people who are going to solve these problems. So if you live in Calgary, I want to be really, really clear. This map is just the first map of many, unless you write to your elected officials and you get them to realize that they've done a big thing badly and they need to find a way to correct it. I realize this seems like a really, really small problem, but we're talking about kids' educations. And when we're talking about the future of the province, there's nothing more important than the education of our kids. And I think that's all we've got for tonight. A couple little housekeeping things that I want to just take a quick sec to address. And then we're going to wrap it up. We had so much. We had another whole little segment planned out for tonight, and then Danielle Smith went and hung out with the Donald, and that blew up our little segment. So we're going to be putting up a little mini episode later on this week because we got a FOIP result back. I've been talking it up, and I was really excited to do it tonight, and then it just turned into a time problem. So we decided that it's not as urgent, although it's horrifying. And it has to do with how exactly did the UCP get to the number that hundreds of thousands of Albertans were going to lose their healthcare coverage if the federal government rolled out their free healthcare plan? How is that going to happen? Because we saw Danielle Smith talk about it. We saw Adriana LaGrange talk about it. We saw a lot of them talk about it, and nobody could figure out where the numbers came from. Well, we have the answer, and we're going to be dropping it in our a little mini breakdown what the FOIP is going on here episode later on this week. It'll go up first for our Patreon sponsors. We're aiming for Wednesday for that. So this is where I do the plug for the Patreon. If you enjoy the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more than if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, because all of these FOIPs, they're not free. So it's our Patreon sponsors who let us upgrade our cameras and who let us upgrade our internet connections, and because they give us the funds to do that. So if the work that The Breakdown does is something that you value, then sign up to support us. If you're somebody who maybe doesn't like the long-term commitments, let's say, then you can also just send us a transfer at info@thebreakdownab.ca. It's set up for auto deposit now because I had enough people yell at me. And any help there is greatly appreciated. Now, those two things that I talked about there, those are our, let's call it operational funding. But as anybody who's followed the show is aware, we have this other thing that we're funding right now, and it's a lawsuit. It's a lawsuit, and it's a lawsuit because I specifically, and the show as an entity, am being sued by Edmonton businessman Sam Mraiche, who facilitated the purchasing of the Out of Bay children's medications, which we lovingly and playfully refer to as the Turkish Tylenot here on the show. He also was the one who multiple ministers have said he hosted them at multiple Edmonton Oilers playoffs games and games in his elite skybox. And he's also done some other things, procurement for the government. And he did not like the episode that we did, or the fact that we've continued to provide commentary based on not just the publicly available media reports, but also the corporate documents that we filed. We are doing a crowdfunding effort to fund our legal defense because he is suing me for $6 million. I want to start off by saying that the generosity of people has been absolutely overwhelming. I'm pleased to announce that our legal team has officially filed our statement of defense. So here we go. And it's already become abundantly clear that there's going to be all kinds of legal gameplay that happens throughout this process. So we've upped the limit for the GoFundMe. If you have the means to contribute, that would be fantastic. If you haven't, that's totally okay too. Subscribe, share our content. All of that is good stuff, and it means the absolute world, because the more people that we can get our little circus out to, the more people know what we think about the things. We're not going to be doing a open mic tonight, only because we're an hour and a half into the show already. But when we go live, it's probably going to be Thursday or Friday. When we go live with the FOIP stuffs, we're going to try to do another town hall. We will for sure be doing a town hall on next Sunday, or an open mic. So if you're listening to the audio version of this, then you can hop on the Twitter, the X Spaces, and next week we're going to have an open floor for anybody who has any thoughts that they want to share. I think that just about gets me everywhere that I need to get. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for everybody who's been listening. As always, huge thanks to our chat. And that's what we've got. This week is promising to be an exciting one. Tomorrow morning at 7:00 early time, because West Coast or East Coast and everything. Danielle Smith's going to be holding a press conference where she's going to answer reporters' questions about the big trip to the Donald. And then she's on vacation. So hopefully it's quiet for the rest of the week, but she was on vacation this week, and look what happened. So a big thank you to everybody who's tuning in live. If you're listening to the audio version, we'd love it if you thought about throwing a like and a subscribe or a review on the podcast app if you're choosing. And in the meantime, and in between time, to everybody, it's early in the year. It's already getting nutty. It's only going to get nuttier. So take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going.